الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطاهرين الطيبين المعصومين. اللهم صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So we're going to talk today kind of as a continuation from last week and kind of a continuation of what it means to live a balanced life. Now, I know that people who are listening today could be anywhere from 8 to 88 and maybe even older. Last week, we had people who were watching from different parts of the country, and I would also like to welcome you. So, but for all intention, my goal is to really speak to the youth. And if, inshallah, something that I may say may be beneficial to those who are past our youth, then that's all the better. But just so that you know that this is really geared to a younger audience. So living a balanced life, like what does that really mean? And today when I was thinking about it, I thought to myself, let me go ahead and look that up in the Quran and let's see, how you can do those word counts in Quran. I really wondered how many times it was that it was mentioned in Quran. Interestingly enough, in one of the interpretations in English of Quran, I didn't look it up in the Arabic text, the concept of balance comes up 11 times. And what was so neat about it, at least in that moment, was because, when you think of the number 11, right, you're thinking about this. And if you're thinking about this, you're thinking about like this, right? And the idea that just even the number 11 was balanced. I know there's a Scientology to that in the Quran. I'm not saying that that's where I was going with it, but I just found it fascinating. So what I want to do today in this discussion, of course, I want to take the question and answers, but I also want to kind of just start. I want to clear our heads. I want to clear our hearts. And I just kind of want to start from the absolute beginning, trying to make a case for not only why we should live a balanced life, but how we could live a balanced life. Now, we're going to sometimes fall off. Absolutely. That's natural. But let's go ahead and get going. So why is this issue of balance such an important discipline? And balance is a discipline. By the way, balance is not a human trait. Balance is a discipline, right? Something we have to teach ourselves to do. So let's start by, thinking about before we were even here. When we came into the world, prior to our coming into the world, there was a universe. And if we think about the structure of the universe, right, you would think about the way that it is balanced, correct? Right? We have oxygen and nitrogen, we have carbon, we have a perfect orbit, we have a system. The day doesn't take over the night doesn't take over the day. Amin just read this in Quran. Everything swims in an orbit that's perfect. So from an atmosphere perspective, from the way the universe was created, it was created in a perfection, right? It was created in a harmony, but it was also created in a balance. And that, my sons and daughters and brothers and sisters, was created for us. So to imagine that there was this perfect creator with this perfect universe waiting for this imperfect human being to arrive, right? So if we think about that environment before we come into this world, we know that the stage is set. It's set for our survival. Now let's talk about what happens when we're in the womb. Again, a perfect system in the womb. We have a system where an umbilical cord is feeding you and I. A system where the water in the womb is neither too hot, nor is the water too cold. If it was too hot, it would burn your very soft skin. If it was too cold, the water would actually probably stop your heart. So we have perfection within the womb. The ability to have perfection in the womb is what allows us to grow and to come into full maturation as an infant, right? Sometimes we don't think about these things because we're so stuck in our heads and our days and about ourselves, but we don't think about all the preparation that went into getting us here. Now let's talk about your mom in the perfect sauce, the perfect milk that God gave her to sustain you. Neither too hot, neither too cold. Always the right temperature, always available when you need it. Nutritious. There is no liquid on earth that we drink that has the perfection that the milk of a mother has. No formula has been created that can be exactly what a mother's milk is. It may come close, but if you look at the back of those cans of those formulas, they seem to have like 50 ingredients. Sometimes I cringe thinking about what's actually going into that baby, right? So then if we think about ourselves in the next stage of our lives, right, we begin to recognize things. We begin to understand as we grow and start to crawl and start to discover, and our brains are starting to connect, our neurons are connecting in our brains. And we start then to get a sense of balance, and we start to stand. We hang on to a table, or we hang on to a chair. We fall down, we get back up, we hold on to the table again. We then get a little bit courageous and we start to know how to hold our head in a perfect spot and how to put one leg in front of the other. Hence, we learn to walk. All of this before we start to really think about concepts. Then we become these toddlers, the curious toddler, right? And we learn so many things as a toddler. It's like the world becomes our playground. You learned when something was hot. You learned when something was cold. You learned boundaries. You learned to speak. You learned language. You learned to cry when something bothered you, and you learned to smile and laugh. You started to master emotions. You learned how to actually manipulate your environment, and you were probably only 2 years old. By the time you were 2.5 years old, your personality was pretty set. Your parents could probably see traits in you, and those traits stayed with you. Kindness, goodness, smartness, inquisitive, all those kinds of things that we see in children. Let's now move the timeline. Let's move it to when we are, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. You're starting to get that sense of yourself. So far, everything's been pretty balanced. You haven't really had to do too much. Your parents are taking care of you, but you start to get a sense of yourself. You start to see that you have your own identity. Your parents have their identity, but you belong to the same family. So now we have a new scenario because now you're learning to have to balance on your own. True, you've been in school for a couple of years, but you're starting to differentiate yourself. You're starting to see yourself as part of the big picture family, but also as your own individual self, your own identity. And so we start negotiating and trying to balance our identities inside our hearts, inside our homes, outside our homes, in school, and we start to put on different faces in different places because we're learning to negotiate and balance those identities. Let's take it up a notch. Let's say we're 18 years old. And now it's time to make some very major decisions about our life. You have school, you're thinking about which degree you want, you're thinking about whether or not you want to go to college, how you're going to afford college, whether or not you have the grades to get into college, what kind of university can you get into, where you're going to get financial aid from, are you leaning on your parents, how are you getting loans? You're starting to really negotiate life. You need a car, you don't know how that's all going to happen. Some people have it very easy and are fully supported by their parents, while others really have to struggle to figure out these decisions. Got a lot going on. Somewhere along the way, you learned from your past experiences, from as little as 2 years old up to 18, how to make those decisions. Now, you might think that this is a little silly, but I'm going to take you through some leadership exercises that I actually teach when I'm teaching leadership classes publicly. I want you for a minute to think about being on a playground, of all things. I like using analogies because I think the analogies actually stick with us and the analogies can last with us. If you imagine that you're on a playground, right? and you're going to the teeter-totter. This is the one, whatever you call it, playground piece of equipment that's always fascinated me. Why? Because when you teeter-totter, don't you go like this? Right. So let's assume that you're here on the teeter-totter, like this, right? Doesn't somebody have to sit on the other side to get you to balance out? Okay, that's the analogy we're going to use for a few minutes here. As silly as it may seem, sometimes the simplest concepts are the ones that we're going to remember the most. So a teeter-totter has the ability to take you up and bring you down. Life has the ability to take you up and to bring you down. On that teeter-totter, you have to have something that's going to balance you out. So since you can't do it on your own, you can't take yourself up or down, you have a choice to make about who's going to sit or what is going to sit on the other side. So let's say that it's your education that is going to sit on the other side. That education now sits, you're here, you're down, right? You're aspiring to go up because of your education. So that education is in the other seat. You have to make decisions about how that education is going to work to bring you a balanced quality life. What is the degree going to be? How much money can you make after you've studied? Is the degree going to give you a quality of life that you want? Are you going to be able to help others because of what your education is? Is the money going to allow you to do philanthropy or not? Are you going to be able to help take care of your parents or whatever needs to be managed? Is your degree going to give you flexibility, and is it going to give you freedom? Because if your degree doesn't give you a sense of freedom in your life, meaning that you're not working 100 hours a week, your education then is something that's providing you balance. So it's important because the question is, who's in charge? That's the question. Are you the person inviting someone or something to sit on that other side to bring you up? Hopefully not to bring you down very often, but to give you balance. Are you in control of that, or is it controlling you? If you're in control of it, if you're making those decisions, you're in a place of balance and you're in a place of empowerment. So that's just one example of what's sitting on the other side. Let's talk about your lifetime partner. Let's just say there's a lineup of things or people waiting to come take their turn on that teeter-totter of your life. Now a person comes up, not your education. You're scoping it out. Looks pretty good. You give them a chance to sit. They may bring you way high, keep you there. But remember, whatever goes up, what? Must come down. Or they have you down, way too low down, because they're unhealthy for you, because they don't provide for you the things that you need, and you may not provide what they need. It's not a good balance. Giving thought to that lifetime partner that's going to sit on the other side and creating that sense of balance is so very, very important. Now, remember, I said that sense of balance. Why? Because one day that person is your co-pilot. And if you're flying a plane, you have to have a competent co-pilot. That means that that co-pilot can fly that plane safely. They understand the mechanics of it. The passengers, meaning your children, your family who are on that plane with you, are safe. It means that if you have to fall asleep, or if you get sick, God forbid, or something happens, your work takes you away, that co-pilot is there and that co-pilot is stable. Your life partner should be somebody that flies with you when the wind is smooth and can handle it when the wind is turbulent. That's who should sit on the other side in terms of your life partner. These are critical things we have to think about. It may not always be the prettiest face or the body or the handsomest guy or the richest or the coolest or whatever. You have to really think. But let me tell you something. If you give it a try and they sit on that seat and you find out soon enough that you're always low, get them off the seat. Don't waste your time. It's critical because we don't know, sometimes in relationships, we never want to give up. We always have hope. But I say this to you because I want you to have an analogy in your head, because sometimes our emotions take us over and we can't think straight. Does this person give you balance? If the answer is yes, it's a great teeter-totter for life. Let's talk about our parents and our family life. We talk a lot about this at the retreats because it's a safe space to talk. Let's face it, let's call it what it is. Some people have very, very, very healthy home life, and some people do not. And that is because, a lot of people are very broken, and they learn to bring their brokenness into a marriage thinking that the partner is going to fix them or the marriage is going to fix it. That's not the way it works. We can only fix ourselves. Our partners cannot fix us, and we cannot fix them. But you have the luxury of thinking about it. Maybe many of your parents didn't have that luxury. Maybe many of your parents didn't have, the freedom that you might have to make these choices. But in the end, again, keep that co-pilot, not your assistant, literally your co-pilot in mind, because what you've grown up with, if it's healthy, you want to keep it. But if it's been unhealthy for you, you don't want to recreate that unhealthiness in your own home. You have a chance to turn it around, whether that requires the balance of getting therapy, whether that requires the balance of, getting your head on straight, your emotions strong, finding God, talking to someone who can help you out, whatever it is, you got to recognize what's broken before you take that big leap into a marriage. This is why we have about a 60% divorce rate, is because people are thinking that they can fix themselves through bringing in another person into their life. Or then they get married and the teeter-totter is really off balance. So they think, if I have children, that's going to fix the problem. And it doesn't fix the problem. And then children end up becoming victims. And then the home is broken. And I'm not saying that all divorced families are unhealthy. Sometimes a divorced family is healthier than a family that's not a divorced family. But what I am saying is you have an opportunity when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 25, 30, to really make some solid decisions about who that partner ought to be. And then, of course, to always continuously do process improvement with yourself. Now, let's say that it's, again, coming back to the family relationship. Let's just say it's the parents or your siblings who are sitting on that chair, on that teeter-totter, taking turns. And it's not always balanced. The question is, what can you do? You can't really kick them off, and you can't kick them out of line, right? That's your family. But guess what you can do? And I say this from a place of love. You can decide to get off the teeter-totter yourself for a while. You can decide that what you can't fix, you can disengage. And I don't mean disengage by being disrespectful. I mean disengage right here. You remain respectful. You find a way to deal with it. You get the help that you need to tweak it. You try your best to keep harmony and balance in your family home. And sometimes you might be the only person who can do that. So as we talk about this balancing of our education, of our life, just always remember you didn't learn to walk right away. You had to go through so many steps. So much had to be prepared for you before you were able to even balance yourself. Now, I want to talk to you about 3 really powerful principles in leadership. The first one is to be proactive. Okay, that is in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I talk about. Read the book. Just go get the book off of Amazon and read it if you haven't read it. It's a book for the lifetime. It really is. I'm laughing because I always have to look at this little camera hole here, and I can't shift my eyes because I want to look at Jeanette and have a conversation with her, but I'm having to look this way. But let's say with these habits that you actually try to Islamicize them, right? The 7 habits were created, and the book was written by Stephen Covey, who's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He's a Mormon. But the Mormon value system, from the code of ethics that they live by in terms of, no alcohol, no this, no caffeine, many, many things, it's very similar to Islam. It's a very strong moral code. So he writes in the first habit that the first habit to be successful and effective is to be proactive. Okay, so there are some Muslims who do nothing. They really do nothing. What I mean by that is they believe that by doing nothing, they're actually doing something. But nothingness is the absence. Nothingness is the absence of something. So when you think about your life, do you think that you're just supposed to stand there and let God just, work on you? In other words, you're going to occupy space, you're going to use time, you're going to be a consumer of food and of clothing and of education and of resources, but you're of the belief, well, whatever God wants to do, God is going to do, so I have no input because God's going to do it anyway. Let me tell you something. I hear that and it makes me a little nuts because that is not being proactive. That's being reactive to nothingness. And it's actually an insult to God because God gave you a cognition. God gave you an intellect. Not only did God give you the intellect, God created the intellect, and he created it and he put it in you. That's why you're a human being and you're not an animal. So to say that we don't have a proactive role in our life, that we can't change the course of our life, that we cannot affect positive change in our life, this is a very, very, very wrong way to think. I hear people say this often, well, this is just the way it is. This is what God willed. Yes, God is always in control, no doubt. God always knows what's going to happen, no doubt. But God also has the power to respond to our ability to be proactive in our life. You see, that's the challenge. That is the jihad. That's the capacity I talk about at the retreats. You have a capacity. When you learn to work your capacity, let's say you took your capacity to hear. Okay, once you get your capacity to hear, the lid comes off. If you're willing to be in God's world, God will lift that lid and he'll give you a new capacity because God always wants us to grow. He wants us to reach our full potential. So be proactive doesn't mean I'm just going to be a consumer of life. It means, no, I'm going to be proactive. So that means you're going to get on the teeter-totter. That's what that means. you're going to think about your decisions. Now, the second habit that follows that first habit is to begin with the end in mind. So be proactive and then begin with the end in mind. This is how you accomplish balance in life. So what's it mean to begin with the end in mind? I mean, if we were to Islamicize this, we would say, okay, that means the akhirah, right? But it does, of course, because that is our end goal, our heaven or our hell. But you can apply that, put first things first to everything in life. Begin with the end in mind to everything in life. So let's say you're going to go to school. Don't you need to know what your end goal is before you go to school? Of course you do. So let's say it's med school. Okay, so you know med school is going to take 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of med school, 3 to 4 years of residency, and a fellowship if you decide to do that, okay? By the time you're done with med school, you're almost 30 years old. So from the time you're 18 till the time you're 30, if you begin with the end in mind, you know that you're going to float this boat until you're 30 years old. So what are you going to do between 18 and 30 so that when you are at the end, you still had a balanced life, right? So you have to think about those things. Let's say you're going to have children. Let's say you're going to get married, whatever it may be. What is the end in mind? But the ultimate end in mind is, can you get yourself to your eternity? Can you get yourself to heaven? If you practice being proactive and beginning with the end in mind, you will be a complete and total success. Because if we really think about what is important to us, you would never say in a million years, oh, sure, my end in mind is to go to hell. You would never say that. You would say, my end in mind is to go to heaven, to see my family, to be with them, to be reunited with them, to live like the Quran says in this glorious state of peace. Who wouldn't want that? But it comes down to the choices we make. So the third balancing act is put first things first. That's the third principle. So if you put first things first, now you're able to strategize. You're able to say, okay, let's see, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to be proactive about the decisions I make. I'm going to decide who's on the teeter-totter, who's not. I'm going to decide how my end in mind is going to look. And now I have to put first things first in order to get there. Right? So I'm going to give you another analogy. I love analogies. Right? So let's use the analogy of a football team. Okay? I'm not a football fan. A little bit more on the basketball, watch my kids play basketball, watch them play hockey, but family's a football fan. So I've grown up watching it, especially the Michigan State game and the Michigan-Ohio State game. So for those of you who are non-Michigan people, you still know that that's a big rivalry. Let's say that you have a chance to play football, okay? I don't care if you're a guy or a girl, doesn't matter. You can apply any sport you want. Why don't you apply any sport you want as we're having this conversation? And I don't mean to be juvenile here. I'm really serious about this stuff. I think about these things all the time. So it's the analogies that I use for myself. That's why I'm sharing them with you as well. Okay, let's say you have team angels. You have team demons. Now, we have angels. Here they are. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And we have demons. Why? That's part of that yin-yang balancing thing, right? Okay, so let's say you're a quarterback, okay? So you're obviously going to choose Team Angels, right? Because your end in mind is go to heaven. So you're playing on Team Angels. Team Demons They're exactly what they're called, right? They're sneaky. They don't play by the rules, but you do, because Team Angels has a rule book that's written by God. So you play by those rules. You know where the goal is. The goalpost is Mecca. It's the direction that you pray in. Every time you score is because you've had the thought in mind. Your end in mind is to score, to get that ball into the goal. You do that every time you pray, score. Every time you fast, you score. Every time you do a good deed, you score. You're playing offense when you're on the Angels team. Now, let's just say you win. You win big. Those angels are going to pick you up. They're going to carry you on their shoulders, and they're going to ascend you to heaven. And there is the biggest celebration that you couldn't even imagine, more glorious than anything you could have imagined. And you're greeted by people you love, your family members. Everything and anything that you ever wanted is there for you, and you're in a state of eternal salam. But let's say you decided to pick the demons team. So let's say you decided to run with them, and they cheat, they're sneaky, they don't play by the rules. But let's just say you score with them. They're not going to put you on their shoulders. They're going to pull you by your helmet, and they're going to drag you, not like this, like this. And they're going to throw you into a place you don't want to be. Now, hell can also be on earth. Because with the more sins we commit, the darker our souls grow. And the darker our souls grow, the further we are away from God. And the further we are away from God, the further we are from any sense of peace. We're in chaos. And little by little by little, you help that team win. But they don't want to go with you. They want you to go on your own. That's the choice you have to make between who helps you and who hurts you. Those demons can be sitting on that teeter-totter, and I'm not saying this to scare you, but sometimes we have friends and we think that they're the best of people, but sometimes they can be the worst of people for you because they may not be aligned with your values. Bad people want to take what's in us and make us worse. Good people want to pull you up, take what's good in you, and make it better. In the end, the choice is yours, right? Because you're being proactive. So let's go back now to the airplane analogy. Let's just say you got things going right. You're on this airplane. You're a pilot. You got a great co-pilot. Throughout life, you still have to decide whether you're 8, whether you're 18, whether you're 28, whether you're 58, people are going to come in and out of our lives. We still have to decide, how do we keep that balance? A lot of that has to do with who you let on the plane. I want you to think about a passport. You know, passports have lots of pages. I love passports. I don't know what my fascination has been with passports, but I've always loved passports. I love looking at the stamps and the places that people go and all of that. You're going to hear a little bit of ringing. I'm sorry, that's my phone. I'm ringing away. So if a person's passport is a passport that's been issued by God and it's stamped with all the right visas, they pray, they fast, they pay their zakat, they've gone to Hajj or want to go to Hajj, good people. They may have made mistakes, they may struggle, but they're still a person who knows God, loves God, even in all of their imperfections. That's fine. Let them on your plane. But if it's a person who has a lot of pages and none of them are stamped, it's not going to help you balance your life. Don't let them on your plane. This is how we have to think. We have to think about our priorities. Now, Stephen Covey teaches us, if you can master the first 3 habits, to be proactive, to begin with the end in mind, and to put first things first, then you have mastered, or you are mastering. You can't actually fully master, but every single day, you're building the discipline of self-control, of self-resilience, of self-empowerment. When you're able to do that, you are creating what he calls a private victory. It means you're at peace with yourself. You cannot have public victories. They will not last if you can't conquer the private victories, which is an every single day exercise. This is why I always say God, family, and then everything else. God, family, and then everything else. And I say this to myself so many times a day because there's a lot of demands on our time. But those demands on our time, if they take us in the wrong direction, if that means, oh, I'm not going to pray, I'll pray later, then that's wrong. It's thrown my balance off. So inshallah, you have long, long, long lives to live and productive lives to live. Inshallah, you will always be making the best decision. But remember that life is a teeter-totter. It is that airplane with 2 wings. It's about equilibrium. It's about being able to, arrive at your destination and to create for yourself a heaven. Now that heaven can also exist on earth. It's called the tranquility of your heart. And when we can accomplish that tranquility in our heart, we can handle just about anything that'll come our way. It's not easy. I'm not saying it is. But if we're willing to think through our decisions, and if we are willing to have true tawakkul, true dependence upon our Creator, who put everything in a perfect format in order for us to succeed, then you should trust that with all of the challenges in life that will happen, from illness to a million other things, you'll make it. You just have to always remember what is your end in mind for anything and for everything. Okay, so Shinan, what time is it? 8:48. Let's go ahead and open up for questions.
So if any of you guys have questions, go ahead and message the chat publicly or privately. I will be taking your questions as they come. So whoever has a dying question, let's go. And by the way, that was a very, very beautiful lecture, Hajjah. Thank you so much.
Oh,
It
thank
really,
you,
really
Shinan.
opened my mind with all like the analogies. I think I'm more of a analogy type of person. I kind of understand life through analogies. So it's very I think it's very creative to think of life in that way.
Remember last week I talked to you guys about my kitchen sink?
Yeah.
So I had a stressful one day last week where I was really like, I'm like, Jah, go to the kitchen sink. Just go. You know how to do this. You can do this. So I went to the kitchen sink, emptied all those dishes, rinsed them all off, stacked them on the other side, started washing them, rinsing them, put them to the other side. I swear to God, I got clarity. I really did. Like sometimes you do have to find, methodologies that work for you. Whatever your methodology is that works for you, use it.
there is a question. Salam, what are some practical ways to approach trials and tribulations with tawakkul and patience? How do you approach trials with peace?
So, knowing that, thank you for your question, just knowing that life is full of trials and tribulations, right? And the Quran speaks to us about that. God says this to us directly. This is going to be a life of trial and tribulations. This isn't heaven. The earth is not our heaven. Heaven is our eternal place to be, but we can establish that sense of tranquility in our heart. I think, like for me, and it may be different for everybody else, and I think it depends on what stage in life you are. So, at my stage in life, it's definitely head down on the ground, 100%. I mean, I'm like, sujood, got a problem? Sujood, go to sujood. Because what happens when you're in sujood is the blood flows to your brain, right? Your body posture in and of itself, because it's actually like a yoga position, your body posture lowers your blood pressure. You have the ability to think right here in your frontal lobe. Your frontal lobe is connecting to the ground that decentralizes electrical activity. You can actually think when your head is on the ground that way and have a discussion with God. The thing why I love talking to God so much and why I encourage people to do it, he doesn't answer back right away. It's not like you're having a conversation with somebody. It's internal. You know what I mean? Like I could be talking with you, Jeanette, right now, and we're having this conversation. You're going to give me a response, right? But with God, the response comes like you feel it in your heart. You feel it in your emotions. And and by the way, another thing that I love to do, and I know a lot of people do this, go pick up the Quran. Don't feel guilty about it. Just pick it up. It is really a living book. I mean, it really does speak to us. So sometimes when I'm really, really distraught, I do that. I'll just go pick up the book and Allah, please guide me. Let me read something. Help me out. Let me understand. But I think everybody has their own way of coping with those trials and tribulations. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. It's not. I'm not saying it is. But you have to find your way. I also have to have a cup of coffee to think. And sometimes I have to write. Sometimes if I write, I will feel better.
Another question here is, Salam, it's so nice seeing you. My question is, my sister always asks me how to keep people out of your life when you've known them for such a long time. They might be bewitching family. They might even be family. Thank you so much.
Can you read it again?
Yes. So her question is that her sister always asks her, how do you keep people out of your life when you've known them for a really long time? And these people could actually be harming or hurting your family, or they could be your family.
So that's a very, very important question. It's nice to see you too, whoever you are, even though I can't see you, but thank you for saying that. So there's something that's called the toxic family member or toxic family members. And they're really hard to get rid of them because they're your family. So all you can do is to try to protect yourself or your family members from those toxic other family members. Now, many ways to do that. If you can't distance yourself physically from them, you can distance yourself emotionally from them. If they say hurtful things, you can repel the hurt by not allowing yourself to hear it because their intention is to hurt you. So they might be on the teeter-totter, okay? But don't allow them to take you low. You try to balance it out as best you can. But toxic family members are very difficult and it's very painful because these are the people who are supposed to love you and your family. But you have to emotionally disconnect if you can't physically disconnect. Now, if it's harmful, let's say it's physically harmful, of course you have to find distance, you have to be safe, but it depends on what the situation is. And it depends on the family dynamic. You know, there's so many dynamics to this question, right? Is it a sibling? Is it an uncle? Is it an aunt? Is it an in-law? Is it a mother-in-law? Is it a father-in-law? Is it your parents? It just depends on the relationship. But I believe that relationships and family units, they can, like a rubber band, you can go like this with them and they can stretch, but sometimes they break. Another thing is, as you move on in your life, I don't know, of course, how old this person is who's asking the question, anything like that, but you can put respect in one hand and distance in another hand and try to accomplish that balance. You see them, hello, how are you, salam alaikum, but you don't have to engage them in your daily life. So sometimes it's an issue of just moving on in your own personal life that allows you to disengage emotionally.
Thank you for that answer, Hajjah. Another question here is, what are some tips you would recommend to implement in your daily life to be God-centered?
Start with God every morning. Every morning. Number one, because that's when you wake up, right? Okay, so if you're asking me, these are the things I've learned, but I wished I would have known them when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, 25, 30. I actually didn't learn them until I was 36 when I went to my first Hajj. And if you can ever go to Hajj and you're younger, go as early as you possibly can. So this is what I personally do. At Fajr Prayer, I love Fajr Prayer. A lot of people sleep through it. In my early years, I used to sleep through it too, because I didn't know that you weren't allowed to miss a prayer. When they say you can pray qada, late, I thought that was okay. That's never okay, by the way. I just learned from Sayyidina Muhammad Baqir last week. There is no such concept in Islam as missing a prayer and praying it late. In fact, we were talking about a surgeon. It's possible the surgeon could be listening. I'm sorry. Well, we'll just say someone who works in the operating room, not a surgeon. And that person starts at 4 a.m. So the person starts before Fajr. And he was saying, which is really interesting, even if you can't stop to pray, you just have your wudu, just close your eyes and open them like as though it was your sujood. So you never miss a prayer, which I had no idea, because in the Lebanese community, when we were learning our Islam, so many people were praying qada or late, or they were making up their prayers, which is different, right? But just know, at Fajr time, if you wake up, when I teach Islam to non-Muslims, I use this example. Fajr prayer is like the night before Christmas. Now, I know many people freak out about even my saying that, because we're like, oh, she said the word Christmas, shame, shame, shame. Well, they're actually not on my teeter-totter. So 'twas the night before Christmas, for those of you who know the story, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. When I'm teaching the Salat al-Layl or Fajr prayer to non-Muslims, that's the story that I use. And I tell them it's the most peaceful prayer of the 5 prayers because the house is quiet. So start with Fajr prayer. Give yourself extra time, because it's 2 rak'ahs, right? So you get those 2 rak'ahs done, use the same amount of time to talk with God. Center yourself. I said last week in the last lecture, ask God to make you what he wants you to be this day, not what you think you ought to be. Remove yourself from the equation in terms of your arrogance. That's the one time where you really aren't self-directing. You are self-directing because you're having the conversation with God, but ask God to make you what he wants you to be in this day. He will, because he's going to respond to you. And then allow yourself to carry on with your day. Another thing, stay in wudu. I stay in wudu as best I can. Now, obviously, you're not in wudu when you're sleeping, because the sleep will break your wudu. But stay in wudu. You go to the bathroom, just roll up your sleeves, forget about your makeup, girls, and do your wudu. Just do it. Because the state of wudu does something to us spiritually, not just physically. but it keeps us in a certain state of mind and it creates God consciousness in us. So stay in wudu as best you can. And the other thing is to try to really, really pray earlier to the adhan. If not at adhan, shortly after adhan. Get yourself in that self habit. Do something good for somebody else every single day. And it doesn't matter who you're doing it for. You could do it for your mother. You could do it for your father. You could do it for your siblings. You could do it for a friend. You could do it for a stranger who you do not know. But make an intention that God will give you something good to do today. Ask God for his nur. Ask him for it. Ask him to give you his light. Ask him to put that light. This is in our dua. I'm not telling you this. I learned this from the du'as that we have. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you nur in front of you, and nur behind you, and nur to the right of you, and nur to the left of you. Ask God to take the shaitanic things that are in our heads and to push them away from us. Ask God to elevate you in your good deeds and to lower you in your nafs. Ask for these things that are aligning, that are purposeful. And just as we start to ask, little by little, these things just start to happen. Why? Because we're actually speaking them into the universe. The universe has an energy. We're speaking these things to God. He hears us. Your angels are recording what you're saying. So God is definitely listening. So I think those are the ways that we create God consciousness. And to never, ever, ever lose hope. Never lose hope. Never. Because if you can't figure something out, if you just hold still a little bit, as we said last week, if the door's not opening for you, it's not ripe. And you have some patience with it. And eventually you will see if something you were hoping for didn't happen, it will happen in a better way if your mind was having dependency and tawakkul on God to guide it. So it's that, keeping God in your daily conversation inside of your heart. The other thing I do, and I would encourage you to do, and again, I learned this in Hajj, is when you go to sleep, see, I do end of life work, so don't forget that. Okay, so as a nurse, I've done a lot of end of life work. I've been taking care of the dead since I was 15. My grandmother taught me, you're safer with the dead than you are with the living, because the dead can't hurt you and the living can hurt you. I'll never forget that, Allah yarhamha, when she taught me that. But I'm very aware that, God is in control of my breath. I'm not in control of my breath. You're not in control of your breath. You can't control your heartbeat. I can't control my heartbeat. So there's a creator. The mechanism is in place. One day I'm going to stop that breath. So when I go to sleep every single night, I do the shahada every single night. And it just takes 30 seconds. It's just talking to God. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And just go through it. Allah, you are my Lord. Say it in English if you can't say it in Arabic. That Allah, you are my Lord. That Islam, you are my deen. That Quran, you are my book. That the Kaaba, you are my direction of prayer. You are my qibla. That Muhammad, you are my beloved prophet, and I love you. My imams, you are my imams, and you are my leaders. Go to sleep. It's like a spiritual potion. And it keeps us safe, and it gives us confidence, I think, that whatever happens in the night happens. Because remember, we're not meant to stay here. We are built to leave. We're not built to stay. Okay, next question.
Thank you so much, Hajjah. The next question is, as simple as it may sound, I find it hard to talk to God. I go mute when I try, but I crave the feeling to go to him. How can I learn to do that?
Somebody said that at the retreat one year. I'll never forget that. They said, this was about 10 years ago, you said to talk to God. Well, isn't it isn't it wrong to talk to God? I said, what do you mean? They said, it feels wrong, like it's aib that you would just go talk to God. God is God, so you can't just go talk with him. That was a very strange concept to me. And it was strange for her to hear me say, just go talk with God. So there is a formal way we talk with God. That formal way is in our salah. That is a dictated way that God prescribed how he wants to be addressed, and he wants us to speak with him. Now, he did that because those are reminders for us, because he doesn't need those reminders for him. So those words that we speak when we pray, they're intended for us. But that doesn't mean that after you're done with your formal prayer, you can't put your head on the ground and start really speaking to God, but call him by the names that will open the door. So I just don't, out of respect for God, I just don't go say, hey, Allah, what's up? Listen, we need to talk. It's not like that. It's more like when your head is down, oh Allah, Habibi, all of these beautiful words of God, Ya Rab, Ya Kareem, Ya Ghafoor, Ya Rahim, all of these names. Just learn a few names of the 99 names of God and start calling by those names. Now, what might be stopping you is a sense of feeling unworthy to speak to God. And if that's what's going on, then you need to know that God loves you. You need to know that God created you and that you are worthy. Don't be afraid to open your heart to the one who made your heart. He created your heartbeat. He created you. So he's waiting for you, and he's giving you the faculty and the ability to speak. So use it. And if you can't speak, then do it silently to yourself, head on the ground, and silently. If that doesn't work for you, write God a letter. And people have done that because they feel that they can write better than they can speak. So write God a letter. And you would say, what do I do with that letter? Tuck it away. Sleep with it under your pillow. But just get the communication out. You have to just inch toward it. For some people, it's more natural than for others. Make sure it's not a point of self-worth, because you are worth it to God.
Thank you again, Hajjah. The next question is, what does your Hajjah's typical day look like? How do you balance zaman, family, house chores, and so on?
Oh my God, you should have seen me at 20 to 8. I was making 2 different dinners. I'm like, I really should eat before I speak. Rushing, cleaned up the dishes. So my day starts with Salah, of course. I need a cup of coffee in the morning, sometimes 2. I try to take that morning time, few minutes for myself to listen to Quran. I love listening to Surah Ar-Rahman. I love to listen to it. So either I listen to Surah Yasin, or I listen to Surah Ar-Rahman or Duha or something like that, just to ground myself and remind myself that I'm not a big shot, that, I'm here by the grace of God and only by the grace of God. And then I think about what I have to do, right? So God, then my family. So I'm thinking about, what am I making for lunch? What am I making for breakfast? What am I making for lunch? What am I making for dinner? How am I to get those things done? Do I have everything I need in the house to get that done? Do I need to go to the grocery store? Da, 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 da. I have to really strategize, think about all of that, make sure that I have everything. And I'm kind of old school. And if you know me really well, or if you've been in my house, like, I'm one of those kind of old school girls. So I still like bake cake, and like I still do my own meat and grind it. And I love to cook. So like I don't take shortcuts. And I like a clean house. I like for the house to be beautiful. It doesn't matter what the size of the house is, but I love for my house to feel like when somebody walks in it, they never want to leave it. I love that feeling of the kids feeling like, they can come to the house and just chill. One time, a scholar came over and he gave me the greatest compliment. He said, your house, it's like a retreat center. I'm like, oh, good, perfect. Yay. That's exactly what I want. Um, so it's busy. I'm on the phone with Zaman. I could be babysitting my grandchildren. I'm like that, almost like a machine. Boom, 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 boom. But I was raised in the kitchen, and I know how to do that. I know how to balance that and take my mom to her doctor's appointments. It just depends what's happening during the day. But what keeps me from stressing out or how I pivot is the formula. Because sometimes there's a conflict between my family and everything else. Well, Zaman is my like God conscious work, right? So you might say, well, Zaman has to be before my family. No, it can't be that way. Why? Because when I go to my judgment day, my family is my responsibility. God is going to judge me on the kind of mother I am, the kind of wife, the kind of daughter, those are responsibilities, right? So I have to take care of those responsibilities first. So people who do like work in the same like nonprofit work or poverty, whatever their work may be, and they forget their home life, that's not balance. That's actually a recipe for disaster. And then I have a lot of help. Not in my house, because I still do all that myself, but at Zaman, I've been blessed with incredible team of people who work with me, and we're on the phone all day long. And my son just said to me, Mom, how do you do this? How do you work Zaman and you're cooking? It's my iPhone. It's WhatsApp. WhatsApp has been one of the greatest gifts in my life. Do you know how many chats I have with how many groups? I have the NYC group, right, Janan? You guys see me on the NYC group. I have the IIA group. I have, the health committee groups. I have, I don't know, maybe 10 for Zaman. So that's just how I do it. Family chats, all kinds of chats. It's helped.
The next question is, how do you strike a balance between hope and fear?
Oh, I think that we're always between hope and fear. Always between hope and fear. Always. The analogy I use for that one, well, I strike the balance because always more hopeful than fear. But we live our lives between, actually, that is a sign of true deep faith, is that you always have hope, but there is this kind of edgy little fear, but you bank on hope, right? So, the story of Hajjah going back and forth, with Nabi Ibrahim's son, Ishmael. She's going back and forth at Zamzam. She's running back and forth between the two mountains. She's actually running from hope to despair, from hope to despair, from hope to despair. And when she's absolutely at despair, she finds the baby sitting in this little bit of water, and then the water, with food, and it starts to grow into this well of Zamzam that fortifies the entire area. So whenever I'm between fear and hope, I'm hopeful always. I mean, Zaman is hope for humanity. So I lead with hope, but I remember her going back and forth, back and forth. But in the end, the faraj, or the solution, it will come with God. And so whatever the outcome is, it doesn't have to be the best outcome, but the outcome is pinned to hope.
Beautiful. The next question is, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Hajjah, Najah, for this amazing discussion. How do we deal with the mentality that living a balanced life means zero problems or issues in your life?
Oh, that's completely not true. Living a balanced life means that you are proactive about all of the issues in your life. That's the only thing that can give you balance. To think that, so that would be like the bystander example that I used earlier, like the person who just sits there and like that doesn't do anything. You can't accomplish balance without being active. Balance is, what a balancing act is? That is what balance is, right? You're like this. It's hard to be, so we're human. And in our humanness, the nature of our humanness is that balancing act. So, but we become more confident when we're addressing the issues, and we're strategic about the issues and thinking about them. But in the end, we have to ground ourselves in God. You know what would happen if you plugged into something that wasn't grounded? You'd get an electric shock. It's the same way. If we ground ourselves with God, it lessens the shock, which allows for the balance.
So that was the last question in the chat. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to kind of get in their last questions. I personally did have a question. This question rose during your analogy of the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to, like, is it completely 100% necessary that we need a person in our life to balance our life? Or can that be done by through ourselves? I'm not saying that we can't balance ourselves without God, because God, we need God to balance ourselves, but I'm just talking about like other people in our lives.
I think you answered it. So for sure, the pilot is always God. We're the co-pilots of our lives. Okay. Right. So that's a for sure. But I was just talking in terms of, the partnerships that eventually will happen. Because remember, I'm trying to talk to the 18 to like 30-year-old group. Yeah. Right. And so when we're talking about marriage and partners, I just think that maybe that can be a whole nother discussion. And I know that we talk about it and we've had speakers about it, but that right, or as right, because there isn't a perfect person. None of us are perfect. It's important to the way our futures are shaped, So do you have to have someone as, let's just say God is the pilot, you're the co-pilot, a second co-pilot. Do you have to have that? No, I don't think you have to have that. But is it nice to have that? Yes, if it comes along. And if it doesn't come along, I would rather see someone without than with someone that takes them away from God or wreaks havoc on their lives or harms or injures or hurts them. Because that's not what God intended either. There's a lot of people in humanity. Sometimes it doesn't happen though. For whatever reason, sometimes it doesn't happen. I want to tell you a quick story, Jeanette. There was a woman who's now probably close to 70 years old. I think she's about 68. She looks like she's about 45. She never married. And this woman was very beautiful, very smart, very, with it, just very cool. She was born and raised here in America, beautiful family, grew up with great parents, all of that. She did all the right things, but she just never found a life partner. One time, her father was ill, and she came to me, and so she's older than me, and she said to me, now I understand finally why I never got married. And I said, why? She's like, because I was meant to take care of my father, who was dying from Alzheimer's. And then her mother got very sick with cancer. And that's what she did. She took care of her parents. But for her, she found a sense of purpose. She found an answer to, at least for her, as to why it never worked out for her. So these are difficult challenges because they don't go the way we want. It's like people who want children and don't get them, or people who really want to be married and don't find the right partner, or people who get married and then their spouse dies young or suddenly, or children who become orphaned. Like there's all these crises of life, all of these tragedies, actually. And, we have to work our way through them. But I still believe that there's wisdom in all of it. We just don't know what the wisdom is, but we come to learn it with time. So we do have to trust in God, right? There is that. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Everyone is thanking you in the chat for the beautiful discussion, and they're looking forward to having you join us in further discussions in the future. Thank
Well,
you.
I will say the reason why I have not been able to be with you guys is because of the priority of my family. On Friday nights, it was just too hard. I finally managed to get a couple of Friday nights. Thank COVID for that.
No.
You know, but Friday nights is family night. And so it's important that I take care of that as well. Thank you, everybody. Inshallah, I'll see you all soon. Stay safe, wash your hands, wear your masks. The numbers in Dearborn are climbing. It's ridiculous, completely ridiculous. Try to take care of your families as best that you can and be safe, okay? Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Rahmatullah.